Daniel Harris and Priya Malhotra, two strangers from opposite sides of the world, brought together by love, luxury, and lies. He was a self-made Australian millionaire searching for companionship. She was a charming Indian bride with secrets darker than her wedding veil. But on the night of their lavish Sydney wedding, the fairy tale shattered. Within hours of saying "I do," Priya was dead, and Daniel sat drenched in blood, confessing to a murder born from an $8.2 million marriage scam that stunned the world. Daniel Harris had built his life from the ground up. Born into a modest family in Melbourne, he had turned his small real estate startup into a multi-million-dollar empire over 2 decades. By 47, Daniel owned several luxury properties across Sydney and was considered one of the most successful self-made businessmen in the country. His life, from the outside, looked picture-perfect: expensive cars, charity galas, celebrity friends, and magazine features about his success story. But in private, he was a man haunted by loneliness. His first marriage had ended painfully after his wife left him for a younger man, and since then, Daniel had buried himself in work. Nights felt empty, and holidays passed without warmth or meaning. In early 2022, a friend introduced him to an international matchmaking agency that connected affluent Western men with educated women from Asia. Daniel hesitated at first. It felt unnatural to seek love through a paid service. But curiosity and a quiet sense of hope pushed him to register. Within weeks, his inbox was flooded with messages, some flattering, some desperate, but one stood out. It was from a woman named Priya Malhotra from Mumbai. Her profile showed a calm, traditional-looking woman in a soft pink sari, her hair neatly tied, her smile warm but modest. She described herself as a classical dancer who had performed in cultural festivals and as someone who believed in family values and emotional connection over material wealth. Their first video call lasted hours. Priya spoke with grace and sincerity, sharing stories about her childhood, her mother's illness, and her dream of starting a charity for underprivileged girls. Daniel felt an instant connection. She seemed genuine, respectful, and curious about his world without being impressed by his wealth. Over the next few months, their calls became daily rituals. She would message him every morning, sometimes sending pictures of home, cooked meals, or moments from her dance rehearsals. Slowly, Daniel began to trust her completely. For the first time in years, he felt emotionally alive. When he finally decided to visit India, Priya greeted him at the airport with flowers and a shy smile. Her presence matched every picture he had seen. She introduced him to her family, an elderly mother, a quiet younger brother, and a few close relatives who lived together in a modest apartment in Mumbai. They treated Daniel with respect, calling him a blessing in Priya's life. Over dinner, her mother praised his kindness and promised that Priya would be a loyal wife. Daniel felt moved by their humility and affection. The days that followed were filled with sightseeing, laughter, and traditional ceremonies. Priya took him to temples, explained local customs, and introduced him to friends who admired her for finding such a good man. Daniel returned to Sydney, convinced he had found the woman of his dreams. Within weeks, he proposed to her, and she tearfully accepted. They decided to hold the wedding in Sydney, where Daniel's family and friends could attend. The media soon caught wind of the story, an Australian millionaire marrying a beautiful Indian dancer, and headlines described it as a real-life fairy tale. Daniel spent lavishly on the arrangements: designer outfits, luxury catering, and a honeymoon suite overlooking the Sydney harbour. But beneath the fairy tale glow, a quiet calculation was at work. Priya's gentle eyes hid more than innocence. Every smile, every word, every promise was part of a plan carefully designed long before Daniel ever arrived in India. As the wedding preparations moved forward, Daniel's team of advisors began handling the legal and financial formalities that came with his status. His lawyer, James O'Connor, insisted that Daniel sign a prenuptial agreement before the ceremony. It was standard practice. Daniel's net worth exceeded $60 million, and any marriage without a legal safeguard could open him to risk. At first, Daniel agreed. He even brought up the topic with Priya during one of their evening calls. explaining gently that it was just a formality to protect both of them. But Priya's reaction changed everything. She seemed hurt, her voice trembling as she said that a prenup made her feel distrusted, as though their marriage was a business deal instead of a bond of love. The next day, her mother sent Daniel a heartfelt message asking him not to shame the family with cold legal contracts. Daniel, emotional and guilt-ridden, backed down. He told his lawyer to cancel the arrangement, saying love shouldn't need signatures to survive. Instead, he made a grand gesture to prove his sincerity. He agreed to transfer $2 million worth of assets into a joint trust account that would be shared between him and Priya after the marriage. It included a beachfront property, a luxury car, and several investment accounts. To him, it was an act of faith. To Priya, it was confirmation that her plan was working. What Daniel didn't know was that Priya had been in contact with a man named Ro, Hit Desai back in India. Ro, it was not just an acquaintance. He was her secret husband and partner in crime. Together, they had executed similar scams before, though never on this scale. Ro, it was the mastermind, calculating, manipulative, and skilled in digital fraud. He had created false identities, arranged fake background checks, and even hired actors to pose as Priya's relatives during Daniel's first visit to India. Their plan was precise. Priya would marry Daniel legally, gain access to his joint financial accounts, and within weeks, initiate transfers to offshore accounts controlled by Rohit. Once the money was moved, Priya would disappear, staging a breakdown of the marriage and returning to India, claiming she had been emotionally abused. By the time Daniel realized what had happened, she would be gone, and the funds would be impossible to trace. But there was one small problem they hadn't anticipated. Daniel's lawyer had quietly added a clause in the trust documents that required dual authentication for any large transaction, one from Daniel's personal digital signature and another from his financial advisor. James O'Connor had learned to expect complications in high-value marriages and had done this as a precaution, without mentioning it to Daniel. It wasn't enough to stop the scam, but it would eventually reveal it. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, Priya and Rohit exchanged coded messages every night through encrypted apps. They celebrated how easily Daniel had surrendered control. Priya sent him affectionate photos, calling him her dream come true, while Rohit instructed her to keep up the act. Their greed grew with each passing day. She rehearsed her wedding smile, memorized her lines, and played the perfect bride-to-be. Meanwhile, Daniel, swept up in excitement, ignored the subtle signs, an unfamiliar number calling Priya late at night, her sudden trips to handle visa paperwork, and her insistence on accessing his online banking apps to help with travel bookings. Love had blinded him completely. He had no idea that his dream wedding was built on deceit, or that the woman sleeping beside him would soon cost him everything. The wedding day arrived bathed in golden sunlight, with the ocean breeze rolling softly across the manicured lawns of Daniel's seaside mansion. Guests filled the open-air space, dressed in vibrant colors that reflected both Indian tradition and Australian elegance. The ceremony was grand but intimate, attended by business partners, friends, and a few of Priya's supposed relatives who had flown in from India. Photographers captured every smile, every kiss, every moment of what appeared to be a perfect union. Daniel couldn't stop looking at his bride. Her golden lehenga shimmered in the light, her eyes glistened with tears of joy, and her soft voice trembled during the vows. To everyone watching, she looked like a woman deeply in love. As the sun set and champagne glasses clinked, Priya played her role flawlessly. She laughed with Daniel's friends, charmed his mother with gentle manners, and posed for countless photos that would later appear in society magazines under the title *Love Without Borders*. Guests whispered about how lucky Daniel was to find such a graceful woman. But behind Priya's flawless exterior, her heart raced, not with love but with anticipation. Every minute brought her closer to executing the plan that would make her and Rohit unimaginably rich. Late in the evening, after the guests left and the music faded, Daniel and Priya retreated to the luxury suite at the Harbor Grand Hotel. Rose petals decorated the bed, and a chilled bottle of champagne waited by the window overlooking the city lights. It was supposed to be the happiest night of their lives, but only hours after checking in, Daniel's phone buzzed with a notification from his financial advisor. A transfer request had been made from his newly created joint account $3 million, directed toward an offshore bank in Singapore. At first, he thought it was a mistake. Perhaps the system had glitched. But when he logged in to confirm, his blood ran cold. The authorization had been made using Priya's digital signature, recorded only 3 hours after their wedding ceremony. His fingers trembled as he opened the transaction history. Several smaller withdrawals had already been processed in the past few days, test transfers he had never noticed. His mind began to race. He remembered her occasional calls in the middle of the night, the moments she seemed distracted, the way she had avoided questions about her family's background. It all started to make sense. Daniel confronted her quietly. She smiled at first, brushing it off as a bank error, insisting he shouldn't worry on their wedding night. But her tone changed when he demanded answers. He pulled up her phone, and before she could stop him, he saw messages from an unknown number. The texts were short but devastating. They contained details about the account numbers, the passwords, and a plan to leave Sydney within 48 hours. The sender's name flashed across the screen, Rohit. Something inside Daniel snapped. His chest tightened and his heart pounded violently as the realization sank in. The woman he loved, the woman he had defended against every warning, had planned his ruin from the very beginning. His dream had turned into a nightmare in a single night. By midnight, the luxury suite that had been prepared for celebration had turned into a silent battlefield of betrayal. The man who had built an empire on control and precision now sat trembling, consumed by anger and disbelief, staring at the woman who had stolen not just his fortune, but his trust. The next morning, the sun rose over Sydney's harbor, painting the sky in gentle shades of pink and gold. But inside the luxury suite, the air was heavy and still. When hotel staff knocked for the scheduled breakfast delivery, no one answered. Hours passed before a housekeeper, following protocol, used a master key to enter the room. What she saw would later be described as one of the most haunting scenes in Australian true crime history. Daniel Harris sat motionless in a chair near the window, his white dress shirt stained with blood. On the floor, surrounded by broken glass and scattered flower petals, lay Priya's lifeless body. The silk scarf she had worn around her neck the previous night was knotted tightly beneath her chin. The police arrived within minutes after the call. Paramedics confirmed Priya was dead, and Daniel was taken into custody without resistance. His hands shook as he mumbled incoherently, repeating the same words over and over. "She lied to me." Investigators quickly realized this was no random act of violence. The hotel suite told a story of emotional chaos. Half-finished champagne glasses, overturned furniture, a phone smashed on the floor, and documents scattered across the bed. On one of the papers, officers found financial printouts and a handwritten note listing account numbers and coded messages. The evidence painted a clear timeline. Sometime after midnight, Daniel had discovered the messages between Priya and Rohit. The texts detailed plans to transfer the remaining money that night and flee the country by dawn. In one message it had written, "He'll never see it coming, will be in Singapore before sunrise." That was the final blow that shattered Daniel's restraint. The forensic analysis later revealed that Daniel and Priya had argued for nearly an hour. Neighbors in the adjoining suite reported hearing muffled shouting and furniture being moved. Security cameras captured Daniel pacing in the hallway around 1:20 a.m., then re-entering the suite moments before the fatal encounter. No one else entered or left the room until morning. When investigators questioned Daniel, his initial statement was calm but fragmented. He confessed almost immediately, saying that he had lost control after learning of the betrayal. His words were filled with regret, describing the moment not as rage but as despair. He said he had begged her to tell the truth, but when she laughed and called him stupid for believing in love, something inside him broke. Whether those words were actually spoken will never be known, but the outcome was irreversible. Forensic experts confirmed that Priya had died from asphyxiation, with no signs of premeditation or prolonged struggle. It was a spontaneous, emotional act. The silk scarf, once a symbol of beauty and grace, had become the instrument of tragedy. When the story broke, media outlets erupted with headlines: Australian millionaire slays Indian bride over $8, 2M scam, read one newspaper. Others labeled it the wedding night murder. Public opinion split sharply. Some called Daniel a monster who couldn't handle rejection. Others saw him as a man destroyed by deceit. Behind the media frenzy, investigators uncovered deeper layers of the scam. Priya's identity was riddled with inconsistencies. Her passport had been issued under a falsified birth date. The relatives Daniel met in Mumbai were not her real family, but paid actors hired by Rohit. Even her supposed background as a classical dancer was fabricated, supported by staged photos taken in rented studios. The discovery shocked Australia and India alike. The fairy-tale marriage that had been celebrated on social media was nothing more than an elaborate fraud. But the price of uncovering the truth had been far greater than anyone could have imagined. By the time the police carried Priya's body out of the suite, both lives had been ruined. One ended forever, and the other destined to spend years haunted by what love and greed had created. Daniel Harris's trial became one of the most publicized court cases Australia had seen in years. Every television network covered it, every newspaper printed his face beside Priya's wedding photo, and every talk show debated whether Daniel was a cold-blooded killer or a broken man pushed past his limit. When the trial opened, the courtroom was packed. Reporters filled the benches, and legal experts dissected every word that came out of Daniel's mouth. He appeared gaunt, pale, and unshaven. His once confident demeanor was replaced with quiet exhaustion. From the first day, he admitted what he had done. His lawyers didn't try to deny the act. They focused instead on explaining the emotional collapse that had led to it. The prosecution presented the brutal reality: a young woman murdered on her wedding night, strangled in a luxury suite. They displayed photographs of the scene: the scarf, the shattered glass, the bloodstains. To them, Daniel's wealth and intelligence made his actions even more unforgivable. They argued that no level of betrayal could justify taking a life. But the defense painted a different picture of a man deceived by a sophisticated scam, manipulated emotionally and financially until he lost control. They brought in psychological experts who testified that Daniel had suffered an acute breakdown triggered by shock, humiliation, and betrayal. The jury listened in silence as text messages between Priya and Roe. It were read aloud, exposing the intricate details of their plan. Each message revealed how deliberately Daniel had been targeted. Public sympathy began to shift. The world saw not just a murderer, but a victim of a crime that spanned continents. The revelation of Roe, Desai's involvement, turned the story from a domestic tragedy into an international scandal. Through cooperation between Australian and Indian authorities, investigators discovered a chain of fraudulent marriages tied to Rohit and his associates. They had scammed wealthy individuals across the UK, Canada, and Singapore. Priya had played her role in at least 2 earlier operations under different names. The pattern was unmistakable: charm, marriage, access, disappearance. Months after Daniel's sentencing, Interpol tracked Rohit to Spain, where he was living under a false identity, running another marriage scam. His arrest reignited public attention. Extradited to Australia, Roe had faced charges of fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit theft. The courtroom gasped when prosecutors revealed that the couple had already laundered millions through offshore accounts using stolen identities. Roe showed no remorse, describing Priya's death as an unfortunate consequence of business. His lack of emotion only deepened the sense of horror surrounding the case. Daniel was ultimately convicted of manslaughter, not murder. The court acknowledged that the act was not premeditated, but the result of extreme emotional distress. He was sentenced to 18 years in prison, with eligibility for parole after 12. When he heard the verdict, he simply nodded, tears streaming down his face. In his final statement, he said he wished he had walked away instead of letting anger destroy both their lives. In prison, Daniel withdrew from public life, refusing interviews and media offers. His businesses were sold off, and much of his fortune went to legal fees and settlements. Meanwhile, documentaries and podcasts around the world revisited the story, labeling it as the Wedding Night Murder or the $2 million scam. People debated endlessly who the real villain was: Priya, who built her life on deceit, or Daniel, who allowed love to blind him completely. The tragedy left a lasting scar. It served as a warning to thousands who sought love across borders through matchmaking agencies. Governments tightened background check laws for international marriages, and several dating scams were uncovered in the aftermath. Yet for those who had followed the story from the beginning, one image remained unforgettable: the wedding photograph of Daniel and Priya smiling against the Sydney sunset, two people caught in a moment of beauty, unaware that their love story would end in blood and betrayal before the dawn broke.